They didn't want you to know about it. But now it's too late. A decision that shocked the world, put governments on high alert, and left millions of people in real fear of a global conflict. Behind the scenes of international politics, where secrets are more valuable than gold, something was unleashed. Something that to this day remains hidden between the lines of the headlines, in confidential documents, and behind the scenes of the world's great powers. We are talking about the attack ordered by Donald Trump on Iran. A military action that not only eliminated one of the most powerful men in the region, but also raised a series of questions that remain unanswered. What was really revealed behind the scenes at the White House in the hours leading up to the attack? What kind of secret information, hidden evidence, or hidden threats led the then President of the United States to make a decision that could have changed the course of modern history? Some analysts claim that it was all a strategic move to strengthen Trump's position domestically. But is that the whole truth? Or is there an even greater mystery, buried behind layers of censorship and media manipulation? Sources close to the Pentagon suggest that top-secret reports pointed to an unusual movement of Iranian forces, an operation that, according to these sources, would put American interests in the Middle East at risk. But why was this information never officially released? Where is this evidence? Why are so many documents about the case still classified as top secret to this day? Some say there was a larger plan at work, one that involved not only politics and national security, but also economic power and interests that went far beyond Iran's borders. As newspapers at the time reported a self-defense action, many independent experts began to question, could this be yet another classic case of mass manipulation? Was it all a calculated stunt to create a new enemy and justify billions in military spending? Or was there, in fact, an invisible threat, a silent conspiracy that only a few within the American high command knew about? Leaked reports indicate that emergency meetings took place behind closed doors with intelligence leaders, but the content of these meetings remains hidden to this day. And the most intriguing thing, documents from international agencies point to a significant increase in American military operations in the weeks leading up to the attack. Why so much movement? What was being planned? What were they trying to hide from us? And most importantly, what were the true intentions behind this decision that almost pushed the planet into a new world war? Get ready, because what we're going to reveal in the next part will make it even clearer that not everything you saw on TV corresponds to reality. In January 2020, a piece of news took over all the media networks on the planet. President Donald Trump had authorized an airstrike that resulted in the death of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, a name that for many seemed distant, but that for those who know the behind the scenes of global geopolitics carried a gigantic weight. Soleimani was not just an ordinary soldier. He was the brains behind the secret operations of the Quds Force, an elite unit of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. A man who moved agents, weapons and strategies throughout almost the entire Middle East. But what few know is that his death was not just a military response. There are indications that behind this decision were hidden interests, global strategic maneuvers, and pressures that never came to public knowledge. Officially, the justification was clear. The general represented an imminent threat to American interests. But the question that remains is, why exactly at that moment? Why choose to attack just when tensions between the United States and Iran seem to be at an unstable equilibrium point? Some sources close to intelligence circles suggest that the Trump administration received classified reports, concrete evidence that pointed to a secret plan by Soleimani to attack strategic targets. But to this day, these documents have never been made public. They remain locked in government vaults, classified as top secret, further fueling the mystery. Iran in turn reacted with fury, promising revenge and mobilizing troops in several regions. But what many people don't know is that Iranian military movements had already been monitored for months. American satellites captured suspicious images, communications interceptions showed unusual movements, and, most alarmingly, records indicate that Soleimani had been holding secret meetings with leaders of militias considered enemies of the United States. The problem is that to this day, none of these meetings have been officially confirmed by American authorities. Yet, another piece of this puzzle that remains incomplete, shrouded in secrecy, omissions, and perhaps one of the largest operations of political and military manipulation in recent history. Inside the White House, anonymous sources report that the decision to attack was made in an emergency, tense meeting, with an atmosphere of urgency and with information that, according to them, indicated that time was running out. But what information was this? What was so serious that Soleimani was planning, and, most importantly, was all of this really a matter of national security, or just another chapter in a hidden agenda that has not yet been fully revealed? The official version came quickly, almost as if it had already been prepared before the attack even took place. The White House stated that General Qasem Soleimani posed an imminent threat to U.S. interests. According to government spokespeople, he was planning attacks that could kill dozens, perhaps hundreds of Americans at bases in the Middle East. The words chosen were strong, loaded with an almost theatrical sense of urgency. Self-defense, preventing terrorism, protecting American sovereignty. But anyone who follows the backstage of geopolitics knows, when an explanation is so quick and so well scripted, it is a sign that there may be much more behind it. What the mainstream media did not emphasize enough is that the evidence for this alleged threat was never actually presented to the public. No documents, no recordings, no satellite images were revealed as concrete evidence. Everything remained in the realm of narrative. And precisely for this reason, many began to question, was the justification of national defense really legitimate, or just another smokescreen to cover up interests that remain hidden to this day? International security experts, former intelligence agency employees, and even members of the American Congress began to demand more detailed explanations. But all attempts to obtain clearer information met with the same answer: national security, classified information, restricted access. Meanwhile, analysts around the world began to raise hypotheses. Some said that Trump needed a quick victory, something to divert public attention from the impeachment process he was facing at the time. Others pointed to the old and well-known political strategy used by governments throughout history: creating an external enemy, generating fear in the population, and in doing so, strengthening their own image of leadership and power. The key words used by the American administration left no doubt that the tone was one of war: neutralization of the enemy, strategic intervention, prevention of international terrorism. But was this threat real? Or was it all carefully planned to justify a military action with objectives that were never officially admitted? There is a theory, circulating among investigative journalists and former military personnel, that the reports that supported the decision may have been manipulated, or at the very least interpreted in a convenient way. A theory that gains even more strength when we remember that other past conflicts also began with allegations of threats that years later were denied. There are many coincidences. The documents remain classified, and to this day, the truth behind this decision remains a mystery that few dare to question. But what the headlines didn't show is where the story gets even murkier. Behind the scenes in Washington, information began to leak in a controlled manner, as if someone was testing how much the public could see. Sources close to the military high command stated that days before the attack, there were secret meetings involving representatives of the military-industrial complex, businessmen linked to billion-dollar arms contracts, and even influential figures in the oil sector. Coincidence? It's hard to believe that when we look at the history of previous conflicts, in which oil has always played a hidden but decisive role. Some international analysts went further and suggested that Trump was being pressured by these groups, pressured to act, pressured to create a scenario of tension capable of moving billions of dollars in defense contracts and, of course, raising the price of a barrel of oil, directly benefiting companies with historical ties to American politics. And as if that weren't enough to fuel the mystery, there's another layer to this story, a political layer with the whiff of an electoral strategy. At the time, Trump was facing one of the biggest image crises of his term, with the impeachment process gaining momentum and his support base starting to show signs of wear. Political analysts began to question, was the attack a masterstroke to change the media's focus? An attempt to reposition Trump as the strong, ruthless leader, the commander-in-chief who won't hesitate to protect the United States, no matter the cost. This theory gained traction in the following weeks when opinion polls showed a slight increase in the president's popularity shortly after the attack. Another coincidence? Unofficial reports also indicate that meetings with strategic advisors to Trump's re-election campaign took place on exactly the same dates as the most classified military meetings were recorded. Details of these meetings remain confidential, but rumors within the corridors of Washington indicate that the atmosphere was one of urgency, of political calculation, of moves that mixed military, economic, and electoral interests in a way that would never be publicly admitted. And when it comes to wars, or potential wars, we know that hidden interests always go hand in hand with the official narrative. That is why many analysts and independent journalists continue to ask the same question to this day. Who really won with Soleimani's death? Who was behind the scenes, moving the pieces on a board invisible to the general public? And most disturbingly, what else could be hidden from all of us? And it is precisely when we look at the economic situation in the United States at that time that the scenario becomes even more suspicious. The American economy, which had been showing signs of slowing down, began to worry investors, financial analysts, and mainly Donald Trump's re-election team. The stock market was fluctuating. Unemployment was showing signs of rising, and to make matters worse, the impeachment process was advancing rapidly in Congress. Headlines about Trump's trial for abuse of power and obstruction of justice were taking over the main news channels. The pressure was enormous. Trump's reputation was being bombarded daily. And, coincidentally, it was precisely in this context that the decision to attack Iran was made. Political strategists know that historically, presidents in delicate situations often resort to military action to divert the attention of the media and public opinion. And that was exactly what many analysts began to suggest. It didn't take long for some coincidences to attract attention, such as the fact that, immediately after the attack, shares of large defense and weapons companies soared on the stock exchanges. Giants such as Lockheed Martin and Raytheon saw their shares rise significantly. And it didn't stop there. The oil market, which had been stagnant, reacted with an immediate rise. The price of a barrel soared in just a few hours, generating astronomical profits for American oil companies that have multi-million-dollar contracts with the government. Some independent sources have begun to point to a direct connection between the profits of these companies and behind-the-scenes meetings that took place weeks before the attack. Meetings attended by lobbyists, CEOs of defense companies, and even Trump's own inner circle. But, of course, none of this has been officially confirmed. Most of this information remains locked away in national security files, protected by confidentiality clauses. But the pattern repeats itself: an internal crisis, a sudden military action, and soon after, an immediate surge in profits in industries that historically benefit from armed conflict. The most impressive thing is that, while the population watched the events unfold on television, believing that it was all just a response to terrorism, behind the scenes, businessmen were toasting the increase in their shares, and investors were celebrating unexpected profits. And as always happens in these cases, the question that keeps echoing is, was it just a coincidence? Or are we facing yet another carefully calculated episode where hidden interests overrode the public interest? And it is precisely here that the conspiratorial element begins to gain strength. Because the big question that echoes in the corridors of Washington and in discussion forums around the world is, who would really gain from a war? Did Donald Trump make this decision alone? Or were there much larger forces pushing him down this path, forces that operate far from the spotlight, in the darkest backrooms of international politics? We are talking about powerful lobbies, interest groups that historically profit from every missile launched, from every drop of oil increased in value, and from every defense contract signed in a hurry in the name of national security. One such group is the so-called military-industrial complex, a term used for decades to describe the intimate relationship between the US government and the arms industry. Companies like Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and Raytheon make billions every time a new conflict looms. Independent analysts have warned for years that these corporations exert silent but extremely effective pressure on the political high command. And if we look at the financial records of these companies, something stands out. Investment in political lobbying skyrocketed precisely in the months leading up to the attack on Iran. Coincidence? But it doesn't stop there. Another group with clear interests in a conflict in the Middle East are the giants of the oil sector. Names like ExxonMobil, Chevron, and Halliburton constantly appear in reports on political influence, with a history of indirect involvement in strategic military decisions. After all, any instability in that region means, in practice, an automatic increase in the price of a barrel of oil. And do you know what's most curious? Public documents show that representatives of these sectors participated in closed meetings with members of the government weeks before the attack was ordered. And in the domestic political arena, there are still those who point to figures within the Republican Party itself who saw the increase in international tensions as an opportunity to reinforce the idea that Trump was the only one capable of protecting the United States from external threats, a narrative that has historically mobilized voters and strengthened re-election campaigns. With all these pieces on the board, it is hard not to wonder, was the decision to attack Soleimani really a quick response to a threat, or just the result of a power play, manipulation, and hidden interests that no one has had the courage to fully expose to this day? And as expected, the global reaction was immediate and tense. Within hours of the official announcement of Soleimani's death, the United Nations called emergency meetings. Authorities from several countries used words such as recklessness, extremely provocative act, and, the most worrying of all, real risk of uncontrolled military escalation. NATO, traditionally an ally of the United States, opted for a more cautious stance, but behind the scenes, leaked documents showed that several member countries were extremely concerned about the possibility of large-scale retaliation by Iran. Even leaders of nations historically aligned with Washington began to show discomfort with Trump's unilateral decision. France, Germany, and the United Kingdom issued statements calling for restraint, prudence, and, of course, transparency on the reasons that led to this attack. Meanwhile, Iran was promising devastating revenge. The first hours after the attack were marked by fiery statements from Iranian leaders who vowed to retaliate with full force. Images circulated on Iranian state television showed crowds in the streets chanting anti-American slogans, while American flags were burned in protest. The mood was one of pure tension, and not just in the Middle East. The entire world began to wonder, are we about to witness the start of a third world war? On social media, the term World War III exploded into trending topics on Twitter. Millions of people began sharing theories, memes, panicked messages, and, most strikingly, reports of real fear. Many recalled other disastrous political decisions that, in the past, also began with unexpected attacks and flimsy justifications. And while the global population tried to understand what was happening, the financial markets reacted in a predictable but frightening way. The New York Stock Exchange opened in decline, futures indexes plummeted, and, at the same time, stocks of defense and oil companies, as expected, soared. The price of gold, a traditional safe haven in times of crisis, rose dramatically, reflecting investor panic. And oil, once again, reached its highest peak in value in months. The mood was one of uncertainty. Governments around the world activated security protocols, and American military bases around the globe were placed on high alert. Intelligence services in countries such as Russia, China, and even Israel began to intensify their monitoring of possible military movements. And while all this was happening, a single question kept echoing in diplomatic meetings, on social media, and behind the scenes of the international press. How far would this escalation go? And what would be the consequences of what seemed like the beginning of a conflict whose end no one could predict? And as expected, when the official version seemed unconvincing, unofficial theories began to gain traction, spreading like wildfire on internet forums, alternative YouTube channels, and websites specializing in geopolitical conspiracies. One of the most talked about was that it was all just a war for influence in the Middle East. For many independent experts, Soleimani's assassination was just another chapter in a silent but brutal dispute between the United States and Iran for strategic control of the region, a fight for oil routes, zones of military influence, and, of course, political control over the weakest governments in the area. According to this theory, eliminating Soleimani was a surgical move, calculated to destabilize Iran and weaken its ability to coordinate with allied militias spread across countries such as Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon. But that wasn't the only hypothesis that was widely circulated. Another line of thought that was very present in alternative geopolitics channels suggested that the attack was, in fact, a masterstroke to divert attention from the internal investigations that threatened Trump's own political future. At the time, the impeachment proceedings were making headlines every day. Secret documents, controversial testimonies, and a barrage of criticism put the American president in a delicate position. And what better way to change the media's focus than a high-impact military action, capable of generating 24-hour news coverage, a smokescreen, as many called it, created to protect the presidential image from a political scandal that could have devastating consequences in that year's elections. And as if these two theories were not enough, a third, even more disturbing one, has emerged. Some analysts have suggested that the attack on Soleimani was, in fact, a test, a geopolitical experiment to measure Iran's ability to react, a high-stakes psychological game in which the United States would provoke the enemy in an extreme way to observe its military, diplomatic, and even cyber response. A way to calibrate future strategies, understand the degree of vulnerability of the adversary, and anticipate the next steps in a possible war. This theory gained even more strength when, in the following weeks, cybersecurity experts detected a significant increase in attempted hacking attacks from Iranian territory against American targets. Coincidence, or a controlled reaction within a larger script that the public never had access to? And when we look at all these pieces spread out on this invisible board, it's impossible not to wonder, was all this a calculated move down to the smallest detail? Or just another historical mistake, guided by selfish interests and impulsive decisions? Because if there's one thing that history teaches us, it's that major conflicts rarely happen by chance. And in this case, the signs are clear. Secret meetings, billionaire lobbies acting in the shadows, strategic troop movements even before any official declaration, suspicious fluctuations in the financial market. All of this forming a scenario that looks more like the script of a political conspiracy film. Did Trump know some highly classified information, something so alarming that it justified such an extreme decision? Was there a real threat, hidden evidence of an attack in progress, something that has never been and may never be revealed to the public? Or was it all just another dark chapter in the old war for power, oil, and geopolitical influence? A decision that, instead of protecting lives, only served to feed the interests of those who profit from chaos and fear. Questions pile up. Documents remain protected by national security secrecy, and the public, as always, is left with only the loose pieces of a narrative full of gaps, contradictions, and mysteries that insist on not being fully clarified. After all, what really happened behind this decision that almost dragged the entire world into the abyss of a new world war? And with all that we have just revealed, the question remains, was Trump really a cold and calculating strategist with access to information that the rest of the world will never have? Or was it all just another desperate move, guided by hidden interests and an urgent need to create an external enemy? What seems clear is that to this day, the complete truth about the behind-the-scenes nature of this decision remains under lock and key. The documents remain classified, the most important witnesses avoid interviews, and the questions continue to echo. Will the real story ever come to light, or will all of this continue to be buried under layers of censorship, manipulation, and political silence? Now I want to know from you who have followed this far. What do you think of all this? In your opinion, was this a strategic move based on confidential information, or just another episode where economic and political interests spoke louder than global security? Comment below. I want to know the truth. That way, I know you stayed until the end, and that you are part of the group of people who really want to understand the mysteries that the mainstream media doesn't tell. If this content made sense to you, subscribe to the channel right now, activate the bell so you don't miss the next videos, and leave your like because this helps a lot to continue bringing more revelations like this. And if you really like this type of content, click on the next video that is appearing on the screen now. In it, I will talk about the biggest secret conflicts of the century, things that few have the courage to tell.